Tonight, 5 Investigates has new video of the Annunciation Church shooter in a local gun shop 5 days before the attack last week.
Let's get right to investigative reporter Eric Rasmussen, who just obtained the video of Robin Westman.
You know, that video was recorded the Saturday before the shootings. And now the owner of Frontiersman Sports in St. Louis Park tells me the thing that stands out is that nothing stood out about the killer just days before they carried out that terrible attack. Some now call it the face of evil.
You know, the first time I watched all of this, I literally feel like I have to take a shower afterwards.
But when Robin Westman walked into this gun shop just days before shooting and killing children in Minneapolis,
we are devastated by this.
owner Corey Krause says there were none of the classic warning signs.
He was friendly, he was jovial, he smiled, laughed, asked questions. He interacted with 3 of our staff in a friend.
Cameras at Frontiersman Sports in St. Louis Park first recorded the would-be shooter just after 12:30 p.m. the Saturday before the attack, wearing a shirt with a place for well-being on the back. They spent 40 minutes browsing, holding and aiming a wide variety of guns, at one point even speaking with a fellow customer. None of the behaviors Krause says his staff is trained to look out for. What could I have done?
What could I have done? What could I have caught? There was nothing.
These are still questions you ask yourself.
Because he had 3 layers of seasoned veteran employees that know this stuff and they can sniff this stuff.
Krause says the shooter did not get any of the guns or ammunition used in the attack from his store, ultimately presenting a valid permit to purchase when buying a small .38 special revolver. Not me.
NTI'd in search warrants. While the victims and their families will never be able to face their attacker, Krause says he's sharing this video with us with the hope of someday answering questions about how and why this happened. The public only knows so much right now, and if this can shed some light on how this person was and how they were acting and what we do to try to prevent it, because I mean, we work very hard to try to prevent this type.
Krause tells me his staff already shared this video with federal investigators who came to his store last week while he was away. Now, by law, authorities tell me they cannot reveal or identify where the shooter got the weapons that were actually used in this attack.
What stood out is nothing stood out about
At all.
And these are
Still so eerie to see.
He says his staff works hard to try to identify it. In this case, they didn't have much to work with.
Okay. Thank you.
Eric, thank you.
World. I do want to continue our continuing coverage here of that shooting in Minneapolis. As the Minneapolis police chief says, the shooter who opened fire on those children praying at a Catholic school in the city had a, quote, deranged fascination with mass killings. Chief Brian O'Hara explains surveillance video captured the attack Wednesday at Annunciation Catholic school, showing the shooter fired from outside the church through a stained glass window, firing 116 rifle rounds. Children were killed in the shooting. They were identified as 8-year-old Fletcher Merkel and 10-year-old Harper Muyat. At least 15 other children were wounded, along with 3 in parish in their 80s. Now, the chief says the shooter, armed with a rifle, shotgun, and a pistol, later died by suicide there at the scene. While a clear motive for the attack has not been determined just yet, the acting U.S. attorney, Joe Thompson, revealed the gunman left behind several videos and pages of writings describing a long list of grievances. One page reportedly did detail some information saying, quote, I know this is wrong, but I can't seem to stop myself. Investigators also say the shooter once attended the school and their mother worked for the parish. Federal officials have referred to the shooter as transgender, with Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey quickly condemning hatred toward the city's transgender community. As for the mother of the shooter, we are told by investigators she is now cooperating with police. I do want to talk more about all of the latest developments here. Let's bring in Brian Higgins, adjunct faculty at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the founder and CEO of Group 77, also a former police chief and director of public safety. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. Thanks for having me, of course. And the first thing I did want to talk about, we mentioned that time. Police chief said that. The shooter had a deranged fascination with mass killers. Now, overall, is that something that folks out there should have seen and known and said, this is a warning sign. So it's very interesting. The term that the chief used, which is deranged, we see that high school and college age kids, many groups enjoy horror movies. They enjoy following these stories about mass killers, but it's a deranged fascination that we hear about. So that would indicate that it was something unusual, something that we don't see in the, I'll call it, routine of following these stories. So when we see these active shooter situations unfold, and then afterwards the investigation, there are always signs that many point to and say maybe we should have seen it, but it's very difficult, as you see, to know when these things are about to unfold. And on that same note, kind of digging a little bit deeper into that, what are maybe some key behavioral red flags of public needs to be aware of in terms of trying to prevent violent attacks like this. You touched on it, but I want to go a little bit deeper into that. It's very important that we make this distinction between these incidents of violence that are emotional, that we hear stories of people who just snap. That's not what we have with active shooters. When active shooters are on this pathway to violence, they are planning. They have identified the target of their anger, of their grievances. In this case, it was this Catholic school and this parish. So when we have this pathway to violence with these shooters, we know that they're building this case, if you will, in their mind to justify the shooting. And one thing that we heard one yesterday from investigators, now initially they had said that the mother had hired an attorney, and this is of course the mother of the shooter, but we first heard that she was not cooperating with police. Now investigators say she is cooperating. Is that unusual in any way to see the situation play out in that way, and an attorney be brought in? It isn't, and I think we're going to see more of this based on the situation we've had in other states where the parents have been held liable or been charged. That's what the parents are concerned about. I'm sure this mother, not knowing her, not speaking to her, is wondering what she could have done differently. Can't imagine she supports her son in this. So she will, I believe, ultimately cooperate. But what she's doing is getting legal guidance in how to do that cooperation. Thing that we've heard a lot about, really just from a few hours after all of this played out, is the police response. The response from several different law enforcement agencies. You see them on the screen from local to the federal level. So how would you, based on your experience, assess the law enforcement response? As all of this was unfolding, what we need an active shooter calls is get as many police officers to the scene as quickly as possible. And their job is twofold. One, to find a shooter and stop the shooter immediately, and to find victims and get them help. It appears, that's what we saw here. We saw a flood of law enforcement agencies. They integrated, apparently, well, at least on the surface. And what I mean by that is they didn't break off into teams. They didn't wait for their agency to fellow officers. They worked together collectively to enter that building and to get treatment to those injured children. One thing that investigators did reveal, we heard from the U.S. attorney, the acting U.S. attorney for that area, Joe Thompson, who did say 116 rifle rounds were fired. Is that something that would be typical in an attack like this? And I say typical, knowing there's no such thing as normal or typical in a situation like this. These numbers were low compared to other active shooter situations. We still had 2,000 children that died, 8 and 10, 17 to 19 others that were injured, but we've seen numbers much higher than that. Just the bullet count of those higher numbers would indicate that there are large amount of rounds that are fired. When a shooter takes their own life, dies, they are at the scene. How challenging is it for investigators to work to determine a motive, and what role do maybe the personal writings or videos play in that process as a whole when these active shooters end their lives, or their lives are ended during these incidents? It is difficult for you because your greatest source of information intelligence comes from that very person. Having said that, there are other ways that law enforcement will gather and information. It will be these writings to give us a glimpse into that shooter's mind. other actions. They took how they acquired the firearms, how they themselves that day for the shooting. All of these other sources of information are going to be very critical. Family members, friends, others who interacted with him, and going back to the shooter's kind of history. Here we do know, according to investigators, that the shooter did once attend Annunciation Catholic School, and the shooter's mother actually worked there at one point, retiring, I believe, back in 2020 or 2021. What do investigators look at specifically when you have a personal connection here versus maybe a random attack? We see these numbers in the United States about mass shootings. It's very important that we separate out these mass shooting events. It's completely different when you have a corner shooting, a shooting at a party, and you have a targeted shooting like here. In these active shooter incidents, most shooters have a connection to the facility, whether it's workplace violence or schools, whether it's UV or Sandy Hook or any of these other schools. There's almost always a connection to the school, and that's why we part of why. SPE experts know that there isn't this snapping. There is this pathway to violence, and the shooter has identified the target shooter. This is, I'll call it, typical for an active shooter. Situation of this type in a school, that the shooter would have a connection to the school. What are some of maybe the key questions that you specifically think need to be addressed here as the investigation moves forward? Because we've seen court documents, we've received those at the Republic Records requests, and we also know that officials have held several news conferences providing a lot of information. So what questions, do need to be addressed? What indication could it be, could we have seen that would have stopped this? We don't know how many active shooter situations have been stopped, but we do know that there are successful intervention programs in schools and other organizations where they can identify an individual on this pathway to violence and intervene. Now, we don't know how far that person would have gone, but there are these stories I'm sure you've seen of a cache of weapons found, of a plan for a shooting. So the question would be, what would indicate to us that this individual was planning a shooting, and would indicate to us that we can intervene next time? The other question would be, what is a contributing factor to this? What makes a human being flip that switch where they want to kill other human beings to carry out their intent? So it's very important that we look for those indicators that could prevent another one. We can't bring back these victims. We can't go back to the day before the shooting, but the ultimate goal is to stop these shootings from occurring. Brian Higgins. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and provide some perspective based on your personal experience. Anything we missed, anything that you want to make sure to add here before I let you go? Oh, just that the ultimate goal is to stop these shootings. Remember, I'm old enough to remember a time when these things didn't occur. If you look at statistics from the 1960s to today, some of the places where people felt the most safe was at school. And now it's one of the places that caused the most angst to children. I have a high schooler about to enter high school next week. And it's in the back of my mind. And I'm sure it's definitely in the back of a lot of parents' minds here as school does continue and really start up here for the year. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We appreciate it. Thank you.